Oh man, it's Monday night and I need more coffee. Okay, everybody, we're here with another installment of COFOH Live Undead, and I am here with the fantastic Andrew Scahill, film professor of CU Film here in Denver. Oh dear.
Do I have something on my face?
Hey!
Yay. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday! Is the pandemic still going on outside?
I know. I don't think they got it cleared up yet.
No, geez. And I guess we've got forest fires and everything too.
You know, every apocalypse.
Yay! Let's just
Every work, man.
I heard today that we're supposed to be getting an asteroid.
Oh, Jesus Christ. All right.
Yeah, well, when I read that article, it's just like, yay, finally, the end.
Why not? Sure.
And then it turns out it's the size of a refrigerator, and most of them burn up before entry anyway.
Ooh.
So
So
I'm like,
was the incident in Siberia, Tuskegee, where the asteroid exploded and killed a bunch of, anyway.
yeah. Potentially no such luck. It was like, oh, darn, I thought we were going to get the end of something at least.
Right, not a refrigerator asteroid.
Yeah, no, it's unless it's something in response to Indiana Jones Part 4, the Crystal Ball shenanigans.
My response to that was, ugh.
Yeah. So, Andrew, thanks for joining us this Monday evening. How the hell are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm excited about this. I'm excited to talk to you about movies, one of my favorite things to chat about. So,
yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to this. Andrew, kind of tell everybody at home, who you are, where you come from, and how you got into film commentary and teaching about film.
Sure, yeah. I'm an assistant professor at University of Colorado, Denver, in the English department, and I specialize in film. Specifically, I specialize in horror genre. I specialize in audiences and how different audience members might interpret the same films kind of differently. And I also specialize in representations of children. So all those things together, you get one of my books, which is about evil children in horror films. So that's me. And I got into studying film, writing about film. I was actually I used to be a journalist. My newspaper folded in the '90s, like a lot of them did. Competition for the internet. And so I went back to grad school. I got my master's in literature. I was going to write a dissertation on actually Shirley Jackson. Right, Haunting of Hill House. And but I took a great film class. Film professor said, I think you're better writing about film. You should think about that for your PhD. And that's what I did. Went to the University of Texas at Austin, got my PhD in film, and a couple hops to Georgetown in DC, and now I'm here.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Man, so of course, one of the things, I connected with you at, I think, Denver Comic-Con of all things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think.
Yeah. You were dressed up as Doctor Strange, and my girlfriend's brother, Grant, was dressed up as Thor. So
Yep.
Yeah. Mentioned.
That was a fun afternoon for sure.
Yeah.
It's like adult Halloween Comic-Con,
Right. Oh, yeah, very much so. Well, to be fair, Halloween is adult Halloween too. It's just,
True.
yeah, the marketing goes to the kids.
True. Exactly.
But yeah, I told you about Colorado Festival of Horror, what we were doing, and then like just a couple months ago, caught you in the documentary Scream Queens.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought, wow, that's fantastic. Talking about gay and queer representation in film, and I never really thought about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, as being a lot about that until I watched the documentary and realized what the actor was going through and everything like that.
Yeah, it is such a strange story too, because I know people know kind of the history of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is that the main actor in the film, Mark Patton, was a closeted gay man at the time he was making it. And now came this film that had a queer subtext, his first movie he was in, and it basically ended his career. And that's a lot of what the film's about. It's about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, but it's really about this time in the 80s, homophobia, AIDS paranoia in Hollywood. And the power it had to kind of wreck careers.
Yeah, it was so intense. I had, of course, I was just a little kid when that film came out.
Mm-hmm.
But to talk about it and hear about the backlash of HIV, and if you're outed in Hollywood, that's it. That's your career is done.
Yeah, and reminiscent of the Blacklist, if you were suspected, right?
Yeah.
And Mark tells these stories, and I'd never heard this before, but in the 80s, if you were up for a soap opera, you would have to get a blood test first, right? And that was amazing. Oh. Yeah, absolutely. So it really kind of uncovering some of that secret history of Hollywood during that time is a kind of a fascinating project in the film.
Yeah, it made me start thinking about some of the other films that I grew up with. My go-to as a kid, it's My Goonies. But now I kind of, I have my reservations on some of the content, is Monster Squad.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Wolfman Got Nards.
Yeah, it's such a fun film, but then you hear about the little kids using the word, faggot.
Sure.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It doesn't age well.
Yeah, it's amazing the frequency with which that was kind of tossed around in movies in the 80s, It's a fascinating kind of reminder of kind of how quickly language can change, or,
Right. And like even further, like, outside of homophobia too, like I was doing a project a couple years ago, kind of like was it Mystery Science Theater 3000 type thing, where we're sitting there watching a movie and we have to talk through it and just make fun of it and everything. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there with a young lady, a friend of mine, and she's about 10 years younger than I am. And the film was Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh, sure. I remember it well.
Yeah, so the racism is pretty obvious.
Yep.
But and she commented on that, and so I was like, yeah, I'm kind of now mildly, like, I still love the film, but now it's like, now I've got to watch it through new lenses.
Mm-hmm. The one that comes to mind for me from the 80s is Revenge of the Nerds, which I loved as a kid.
Oh, man.
And if I don't really, go back and watch it, I think, like, Lamar's not like a fairly progressive character, right? He's gay, and it made him have superpowers in a sense. But then you watch it, there's a scene in which one of the nerds dresses up like the cheerleader's boyfriend, has sex with her wearing the astronaut helmet, and then he takes the helmet off, and she's like, "Oh, you scamp," and I'm like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, it's sexual assault and rape.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did try watching that a few years ago, and I was so horrified. I'm like, oh my God, the nerds are the villains in this movie. I mean, the jocks aren't much better.
No, but the nerds are sociopaths.
Yeah. I was just like, oh my God. You go back and watch, like, even Animal House, kind of the same thing. I can't remember. I thought it was a lesser degree, but there's still a lot of abuse going on.
Gosh, there's that scene, I think it's Pretty in Pink, where the girl is almost unconscious, drunk, and one guy like gifts her to another guy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see how things age. Like I think you can still have a love for that stuff, but now you're like aware of like these issues, and it's just like, yeah, that's not the right behavior, and you should be in prison.
Yeah, and I think I think it's a really good example of why we should be media literate. What I teach my kids, right, is to be kind of aware of what you're consuming. Think about, don't let a film just sort of wash over you like a passive experience.
Right.
You can watch something and be critical of it, right? You can do those things at the same time. I can have a great experience watching Avatar, even while I'm going, okay, this is just Neo Tarzan. It's just another colonialist fantasy about a white man becoming king of the native people.
Right, the Great White Hope type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do both those things at the same time.
Yeah, the back to like Big Trouble in Little China. So like one of the things that she and I kind of reflected on is like, oh my God, this film is also about massive sex trafficking. So on both sides. So the good guys are just as guilty of it as the bad guys.
Yeah. You make me want to go back and watch the movie, and yet not at all.
Yeah. I was really surprised. It's like, oh yeah, the bad guys are going to be bad, but it's just like, well, the real hero of the film, I forget the character's name, but the kung fu fighter guy, the friend of Kurt Russell's, Jack Burton's character. He had ordered a mail order bride, essentially.
Oh, right.
I mean, supposedly they knew each other as kids, but she comes in and she delivers no dialogue throughout the whole film. And even at the end, when she's like resting on his lap, she looks terrified. and I'm just like sitting there watching her body language, and I'm like, oh, she thinks she's also, it's like, probably so.
Right.
Probably, yeah. I think the sequel would be, kind of a scenario where it's Donald Trump and Melania, and Melania's trying to get a divorce, and I don't know, it's not good. So yeah,
they already made that movie. It's called Sleeping with the Enemy, I think.
Yeah, is that with Julia Roberts, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Jason Larkin just chimed in. Wayne was the name.
Of course it was. Because of course it was.
Of course. Oh, geez, that's pretty horrifying. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like I don't know if you watch Rick and Morty. So episode 3 of season 3, the pickle episode.
Yeah.
They have Susan Sarandon come in to do the voice of Dr.
Yeah.
And I think was it the mom comments? It's like, oh, by the way, a racist name. It's like, well, yeah, I guess you can blame that on Harmon, but I think they're making a point of that.
Right. Lampshading, right?
Yeah.
It's not racist if we point out it's racist, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's still kind of makes me feel like it.
Right.
But yeah. Oh man. So cool. The how do you feel that gay and queer and lesbian representation? I can't talk. How has that like changed over the years? Do we has it finally like started evolving where we're not referring to in films as tropes as that lifestyle is like vilifying it? Because it seems like there's always that reference. It's like, oh, this killer had homophobic or homosexual tendencies. And
right.
Even back then, I knew that was wrong.
Sure. I mean, it used to be that you didn't even need any more explanation for why the character was villainous than to reveal that she's actually a man, right? Or that she's queer, right? Or that she's a lesbian. Oh, well, of course she's a psychopath then, right? No more explanation needed, right? Of course, Catherine Trimble is a is a psychopath and basic instinct because she's bisexual. End of story, right? So we don't do that as much anymore. It's really funny. We think about how like a connotation around queerness is necessarily worse than naming it outright, and that's actually not always true. People got away with a lot in the 30s and 40s and 50s through connotation, right? And when things had to be kind of named in, say, the 60s and 70s, then you got, like the children's hour, where like, yes, they're lesbians, but they're suicidal. You know what I mean? Or yes, they're queer, but they're going to be blackmailed for it, right? Or they're going to be victims of a hate crime. And so I think there's a certain freedom to the connotation that happens. I definitely think in terms of connotation, we're nowhere out of using queerness to make things more monstrous. It's not horror, but if you look at something like Twilight, it's like the good vampires are white. They wait till marriage to have sex. They play baseball. They eat apple pie. The bad vampires are nomadic, multiracial, hedonistic, right? They don't.
I've never watched the Twilight film, so yeah, that.
But they're not denotatively named as queer, but it's quite clear that they're not opposed to family and normativity, right? And that's the problem with it. So we still get that, I think. I think the monster as like a threat to the family, absolutely. It's still just intrinsic to the horror genre. Or if you look at something like the zombie genre, it tends to say that the people who should survive are the ones who can reproduce. And the ones that don't, right? So like in the zombie film, there's usually like a heterosexual romance that comes together and those two people survive. This sort of implicit argument is that if you can't reproduce, you're not going to reproduce, you're not as worthy as other people.
Right. The even like the Walking Dead, one thing that I think those same sex couples, I think you're right, they never survived. But even more to that, like if you were black, unless you were Michonne, you might not be long for that series, unless you had a pretty interesting story arc, and then you go into the fear of the Walking Dead.
Right. It's a great documentary called Horror Noir that's all about kind of African American representation in the genre. Actually, the producers of that documentary that was so successful that they're now producing one on women in the horror genre and one on queerness in the horror genre. And I'm actually in the one on queerness.
Cool.
That should be coming out this year on Shudder.
Oh, nice. On Shudder?
Yeah.
Excellent. Do you know when?
So we were slated for a July release. I think everything's been pushed back because of COVID, so we're still kind of waiting to see. But there's some.
Come on, it's on Shudder. It's digital. Unless you're going to have a theatrical release. Come on.
True. I was hoping for a little LA premiere, but.
I see.
They got some really good gets for the documentary. Clive Barker is in it.
Nice.
Which I was really, really thrilled to hear. So
yeah, that's pretty cool. I hear Clive, health-wise, he's having some difficulties.
They actually had to go to his house to film the segment with him because he's in such poor health, but he really wanted to do it.
Poor guy. Yeah. Incidentally, a couple of years ago, my friend Enigma and I, the sideshow performer.
Sure.
Yeah, we put together a script to pitch for him. He was doing like Project Greenlight or something. We didn't get very far. Enigma said he was friends with him, whatever that means.
Yeah, who knows what that means?
Yeah, didn't matter, So, but anyway, yeah, it's along with the lines of American Noir, that documentary, there's a segment in there where they're talking about monsters, and the representation and how supposedly some of that could be referred to as representing African Americans, as the other, as the outsider. There's I guess some people in Black culture look at like the creature from the Black Lagoon as that kind of representation.
Right.
So it kind of made me think of like films recently, like Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water.
Sure.
and kind of saying like, what does that say about sexuality, as well as clearly, race. I mean, it's a creature, outside of what we know to be human, but so is his love interest.
Right.
So it's like, oh man, I'd love to sit down and kind of rewatch that and see what other things I can, kind of pick up on.
Sure.
Obviously, love transcends all. Hopefully, that's the universal message for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Judith Halberstam, she called monsters meaning machines, which I always like, right? Like zombies have meant different things, right, in different eras, and they keep kind of accruing meaning because they're really just empty signifiers. They can kind of be filled with like whatever is terrifying, to us in that particular era. So like in the 70s, they were often used as a metaphor for consumerism, mindless consumerism. Today, they're more of a metaphor for global pandemics, right? And our inability to kind of stop the spread of disease across borders is kind of what we tend to use the zombie genre for today. I think horror as a genre, it's one of those platforms or that seems to be able to reflect a mirror onto society pretty quickly, as far as like popular media goes. Right. I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. Like horror by nature is very visceral, and so it doesn't work unless it taps into something that works in a particular time and place, right? Films that were scary in the 40s are not scary to us today, right? Because it's so intimately connected to history. The other is that because they're relatively cheap to make, they can kind of churn them out faster. And so they always kind of feel more contemporary.
Right. I remember like going to a screening of Hostel before I even knew what Hostel was and what it was going to be. And Eli Roth was there, and he and I chatted about our love for Takashi Miike films. And then when he did the Q&A, he was talking about, it's like, one of the things that was constantly on my mind, writing the script and everything, not only the stuff that clearly was happening in the underground world in Eastern Europe, of which this is based off of, but more importantly, what's going on in Iraq and in Afghanistan. I think we just invaded Iraq like 2 years prior to the film's release, and it's just like, we go over with this chauvinistic bravado into these places that we don't know and don't understand why. Hey, we just saved you guys. Why aren't we being loved? And being met with an amazing amount of violence. It's like, well, you brought it on yourself. You completely fucked up this world for these people. And so I think that's where some of the messaging comes in for Hostel.
Yeah. Hostile and immensely homophobic film, right? It's the enemies populated by these kind of sissy, prancing, Europeans who torture men as if it's a seduction. And it's a film that is critiquing bravado, but it ends in bravado, right? It's a film that almost genre shifts into a James Bond film because it doesn't know how to resolve the film in the kind of horror genre, and it has to default to this kind of macho revenge narrative, right? Revenge on the kind of sissy queers who imprisoned him.
That's another thing I didn't even think about. But it's good to have these conversations, because like what you said, it's you need to consider how you consume your media, and how you think about it too. After like Hostel, like Eli did that film Hostel 2, which I thought the mood and tone was different in that it was the female perspective. and I absolutely love the switcheroo in the film, you know, and yeah, it seemed like the perspective just seemed to be much more deliberate in that. So it's like, yeah, don't fuck with women because we mean what we say and what we do. And I yeah, by the end of it, it's like, yeah, I was cheering for the women the whole way through, but I was like, please do not meet your demise, not this way. I do hate horror films that's just bleak. Like the whole tone, everything's bleak. You don't like the people that should be like the final girl or the final individual. Ends up being just a complete asshole from start to finish. There's no story.
It's so funny that you like said I wasn't the final girl and then you paused and said the final individual, because I don't think we really get final boys. I don't think it's a thing that the genre can deal with yet, because part of the structure of the slasher is that you get a girl who doesn't have the phallus. She's attacked by this sort of male creature with usually some kind of phallus, right? Some sort of knife implement. And at some point she has to turn the tables on him, and she takes up his weapon and she kind of stabs him. Problem with the final boys, we can't deal with a boy being unphallicized at any point, right? The genre can't yet deal with a sissy boy who gets to turn the tables on a monster.
Okay, interesting.
Also the closest thing we got. And it goes into like hypermasculinity, but he's never really, this sort of unmasculine boy.
Yeah. I wanted to say, I thought I saw a movie where the gay, male ended up being the hero, but man, I can't remember. So I think to your point, I would agree.
Any male that's not hypermasculine, I have yet to really see it.
Yeah.
I don't think the genre has kind of prepared itself, or who knows, that we're underestimating our audience. Who's to say? Right.
I think I think our audience definitely is a little bit more sophisticated today. There's a lot more open conversation and talks like this to kind of resolve ideas or come to conclusions or at least just air observations and stuff. At the same time, the opposite is also true, where it just becomes grotesque and people are sick and disgusting and they troll things online.
I mean, I look at the landscape of film today. I don't know why it took a year with Black Panther, Hidden Figures, to say, oh, maybe white audiences will go to a film with a black lead. Like, why was it 2017 before Hollywood had to kind of reckon with that fact? So I think Hollywood is inherently conservative, right? Because of all. Oh yeah, Topher's great. That's a great sort of revisionist slasher, right? Cabin in the Woods. I've done a podcast on that one too. I love that movie. I could talk about that for days.
That one is one of my favorite, like bubblegum. Joss Whedon, Drew Goddard, I think. But it's so fun and punchy, and it's based, to me, it's like an R-rated Buffy episode.
I love that comparison. I mean, they've got a good number of casts from Buffy and Firefly, so why not?
Yeah. So to Rona's point, Topher wasn't gay, but he wasn't hyper masculine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that they took the character who was the kind of pot smoking paranoid and they made him the one who got it right. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of the point of the film is thinking about this sort of contemporary landscape, thinking about the structure itself as the world we live in, and the government who's kind of controlling a lot more than we're willing to admit that they're controlling. And then they drop down to the machine. What the film's saying is, like, I don't think you're paranoid enough, right?
Right.
You need to be more paranoid. because there are things happening below the surface that you're not even aware of.
You're not going to be privy for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even with your best conspiracy theories. That's not what's happening. Well, and even in modern times today, you got the pandemic, you've got these protests. While things are you're seeing the cracks in the systems and stuff, and hopefully we're able to take the time to really do some meaningful adjustments towards those situations. There's some things going on with the powers that be. It's like, hey, we've got the opportunity. Let's do some shady shit.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about how the genre interacts with history, there's a reason why after Watergate, after the assassination of JFK, we started to get these paranoid thrillers, right? We started to get these films like Stepford Wives, Rosemary's Baby, where people are thinking, God, maybe there are cults. Maybe I do live in a world of conspiracies. And I like to say, like with my students, I'm like, if it's not a theory, if it's true, it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It's just a conspiracy, And so we were seeing like the return of the paranoid thriller in things like Get Out and other films. And I don't think that's an accident. I think it is reflective of the time we're living in, right? That we feel like there's machinery operating around us that we can't even see yet.
Right. No, very much so. One other thing too that comes to mind is when you love a media or a piece of art, but the creator of that is not the nicest person and has a perspective that you just can't connect with.
Yeah.
Obviously, like. We earlier before we went live, we were talking about Lovecraft Country, and of course that's inspired by some of the works of Lovecraft himself.
Yeah.
He was not a good guy. He was a full-on racist.
Absolutely.
He made some great art, but how do you separate or reconcile like those personal views that a person like that had with the art that was left behind. And even, in modern fare too, you've got J.K. Rowling who came out with some transphobic tweets. And that, I mean, that's pretty infuriating.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's actually one of the questions that we asked in Scream Queen, because Scream Queen is Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is a deeply homophobic film. What it sort of proposes is that Freddy's this sort of metaphor of this kid's repressed queerness and comes out whenever he's like aroused by a male classmate or what have you. And in the end, he's cured through the love of a woman, right? And so it really advocates a sort of a reparative kind of therapy approach to queerness and says, look, if you give in to this desire, the end result of it is sadism and masochism and death, right? But it's interesting because queer fans have kind of embraced the film, ironically, you could say, as camp. And it also talks about this sort of scarcity of resources that you had as a queer person. So I remember there's a scene in the film where he sleepwalks and ends up at a gay bar. It's not just anything; it's an S&M leather bar, of course, because that's how they envision queerness in this film. I remember watching it when I was however old, 7, 8, and I went, "Oh, that's a gay bar." You know what I mean? And I was like, I didn't even know those places existed. So 2 times in the 80s, I saw a gay bar. It was in that movie and in Police Academy. And films, there were places I shouldn't want to be, and yet they told me they existed. You know what I mean? So like my ambivalent response to that kind of went into overdrive. But I think when you're a minority, watching something that is not written for you and is often antagonistic to you, you learn to become a scavenger, right? You learn to enjoy a text for the parts that work for you and ignore the parts that don't. And that is just part of, I think, being a minority spectator, is that you're a scavenger, that you pick up bits and pieces. There's a great story about lesbian audiences who would go in groups to this film called Desert Hearts, in which there's a lesbian romance, but then she gets in her system and she ends up with a man at the end. And there's these sort of stories about like lesbians going to this film and then all leaving a half hour before the film ended, you know? And I love that kind of stuff. And I think it really speaks to how we actually consume media, right? We don't always consume it in its entirety. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm ambivalent. I have an ambivalence towards most films, you know? It's like I enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and yet it's really based in fascism, right? It's really based in the idea that some people are better than others and more deserving of life. And a lot of it is using the kind of benevolent millionaire narrative where we take a guy who's already a millionaire. If we just give him more autonomy, like Batman, Iron Man, he'll just be a good guy, right? And I think anybody who lives in the real world during this presidency knows that that's not true. But it is a story to keep kind of touting out about power and autonomy. So I think it's important to be literate about what we consume and understand that we kind of meet the text halfway a lot of times, but also call out the text for what it's actually doing, what it's actually saying. Conversations.
I remember seeing some like even with like Incredibles and Incredibles 2, a lot of the references to like Ayn Rand. You know, that level of exceptionalism. We're above everybody. We're better than everybody. You know, you better.
And the villain wants to make everyone the same. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's presented as villainy.
Right. Most definitely. Looks like Brandon mentioned something about Texas Chainsaw Massacre has that opening narration that makes it seem as if it's a true account, which I had read that Henkel and Hooper included as a riff on the government lying to the public in the Watergate scandal.
We were just talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre before this started because I mentioned that your background looks like an unexplored room at your home.
I'm just missing some feathers and some dogs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's scary. Look.
Like a human skeleton couch or something. Yeah.
Everybody watching out there, it's just casted latex. That's all. That's as far as my creativity goes.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a favorite film of mine. But yeah, the opening sequence that Brandon is talking about, it's set against solar flares. And it's a bunch of news report about basically the world gone mad is kind of what it feels like. And, you know, that movie is really about the end of peace, love, and understanding. It's about the Age of Aquarius ending, and we're now moving into retrograde, which means we're moving backwards, right? And it is a film about the worry that we're going to move backwards after the hippie generation. And the fear that the past is going to eat us alive, right? And it's a Vietnam War protest film, and it's about young people and the worries that the world is going to move backwards, and they're being sent to Vietnam to be cattle for the slaughter, you know. And so that is kind of what that film is about for me. It's about the anxiety of the young generation that we're going to have to pay for all the mistakes that our parents made, which is still what the slasher is about, you know.
Yeah, it seems like we're still paying for our parents.
Yeah, well, and I think that the slasher is all about generational conflict, right? Which is what I love about Cat in the Woods, where they're like, "Are you going to repeat this cycle of violence?" And they're like, "No, fuck it, we've had our turn." You know, we will burn. And so Cat in the Woods says, "Now you got to burn everything to the ground and start over." You know, in this era when we're looking at these institutions like the police, we're asking these questions, right? Can we reform it, or do we just burn to the ground and start over? Right? Is the machinery already too large and cumbersome for us to even manage?
Hopefully not.
It's you like the hopeful endings. I have to admit that I don't generally if they feel inauthentic. You know what I mean?
Well, you know, like when we talk about like something like Get Out. You know, one of the tropes that that you usually see with a black character like that, it's just like yeah, you know, he's either going to end up dead or in jail.
Yep.
And luckily, you know, the filmmaker Jordan Peele decided it's like, no, we've seen that movie. You know, let's have something a little bit more optimistic.
If I remember, like that was the kind of originally conceived ending, was to go a lot darker.
Right. I think it was to go. Yeah, he was going to go to jail. That's
Sure.
He's like, well, he's black. Yeah. To me, it looks like he killed everybody, and there's not a lot of evidence to say that he was tortured.
Right.
So
this is a question we ask a lot in queer cinema, right? It's that how much do we present the sort of lived reality of being queer and the possibilities of violence and that sort of thing, and how much do we often need a fantasy, right? And kind of balancing that has been a sort of challenging thing for queer cinema. I would say from the 2000s on. Before 2000s, it was all AIDS narratives and hate crimes, right? And there's certainly a place for that, but there's also a place for fantasy and optimism, right? So,
yeah, I'm all for optimism.
But, you know, I mean, I love a dark ending when it feels authentic. Like the ending of The Mist for me is perfect. Like
I would agree
so happy with how dark that film went.
Yeah.
That it really pleased me, and I think I would have been put off by a more optimistic ending.
Right. No, I totally agree there. I like a dark ending when it feels, you know, like that's the natural progression. You know,
you do an I Am Legend where Will Smith like is the cure to the. I'm like, terrible, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that last minute little throwaway thing that they kind of put together. It's like, you know, I was like, well, the only redeeming thing is at least he sacrificed himself.
Plus, if you read Richard Matheson's novel, you're like, what a cop out,
right?
What could have been a really rich kind of ending. They still haven't done a really good version of that movie yet, in which you are the monster.
I still have a soft spot for the Vincent Price version. Just that black and white.
Yeah,
it's so gorgeous.
You don't need to do like the original ending of that, where Richard Matheson is like, actually, we're the monsters. You know what I mean? And this is really just another civilization that wants to survive.
Right. It kind of, you know, another one like this one's sci-fi, but Ender's Game.
Yeah.
Basically, same kind of lesson. You know, we're the aggressors, and we've been killing this alien. Starship Troopers. To that point,
that's one of my favorite adaptations for what he did, which is essentially make a parody of the novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And actually, really similar to what we were talking about with Lovecraft Country is I think that's Verhoeven, right? Who did Starship Troopers?
Van Hoven? Yeah.
Yeah, but he basically is making fun of Richard Heinlein's like xenophobia in making a film that kind of takes the ideology of the novel and makes it fascist, right? It makes it visibly fascist. That's a great adaptation.
Yeah, I think that's also like with when we're talking about Verhoeven, you know, that seems to be like a common thread through a lot of his films is, you know, exaggerating, you know, these parts and, you know, the hyper violence, of course, and then but you know, showcasing the, you know, the authoritarian or the fascist society that they live in, and just showing like everyday people like completely not reacting to the hyper violence and the things that we have to do to get to that level. So like Starship Troopers, it's like, yeah, these guys are our heroes. It's like, dude, they're the Nazi stormtroopers. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
One thing too, like the Holy Trilogy, like Star Wars, like I've got a Stormship Trooper T-shirt, you know, that I like to wear. I'm just like, oh wait,
they're space Nazis.
Yeah, they're the space Nazis. It's just like, yeah, you know, probably shouldn't be so gung ho for as cool and as interesting as the villains are, it's just like, yeah, there's still a representation. Yeah, there's still an analogy for Nazi Germany.
Sure.
So, it's like we got, so like to back to your point, be mindful of the media that you consume.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh man. Yeah. So, as a fan, what have you been watching lately that you've been really connecting with?
Well, let's see. I do kind of a movie night for friends of mine every week, and one of my favorites lately has been a film called Bacurau. I don't know if you were able to see that one. South American. I want to say Argentinian, but don't quote me on that. But it is a fascinating little film in which Bacurau is a small town in South America that basically gets erased from Google Maps, and it becomes a playground for Europeans and Americans to come and just slaughter a town in a kind of paramilitary way. But because this small town has been through several revolutions, they know how to fight back. And so it's a really cool movie that kind of genre shifts into almost a Wild Bunch type Western where they defend themselves against the Americans and Europeans. I highly recommend it.
Wow, I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds amazing.
Definitely check that one out. One film that's actually come out fairly recently that I rather enjoyed is One Bedroom. And I saw it's on Netflix, I think maybe just today, definitely just this week. And it is a film that is a pretty familiar narrative. A young, naive girl moves into a community and maybe her neighbors are cultists or some not to be trusted, right? But and it's definitely riffing on Rosemary's Baby. There's even a neighbor who's clearly like Minnie Castanets, but where it goes from that initial like, oh, this is Rosemary's Baby is really interesting. And it's kind of like the twist, but also the point of the film is kind of where it ends up going from your expectations.
Okay.
So that was a really fun one.
Nice. That's pretty cool. I mean, obviously, consuming Lovecraft Country. You and I talked about Vast of Night.
Yeah.
As a film, it's a great radio show. So I definitely recommend that to anybody who can listen. You don't have to watch it; just listen.
Yeah, it sounds like good advice for it. Absolutely. The next film I'm going to show is called The Beach House. Lovecraftian. And that one is kind of an alien invasion meets Cronenbergian kind of body horror film. So if that's your bag, disgusting things crawling under people's skin, that's a great movie for you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, growing up, like I love Cronenberg. So everything from The Fly to Videodrome. I thought Crash was an interesting entry. When I was a kid, it's like, it came out about the same time as like Showgirls and stuff. Like, yay, boobies! But then going through art school and everything, and it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of meaning, even in both films.
Yeah. Wait, even in The Fly, I mean, one of the things that Cronenberg loves to do is to make sex gross. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's something he really excels at. Whenever he does kind of erotic content in the film, it's disgusting.
What was that? Oh, Shivers.
Shivers, absolutely. That's a super gross film. Yeah,
man. Yeah, that one was pretty off-putting. I love the film, but it's just like, ew.
Yeah. Whenever I teach the horror genre as a class, I do about like once every 2 years. The first assignment is always in autoethnography, where I ask my students, like, what scares you? Because the genre is so personal. Things that terrify. I had an ex who was deeply afraid of any possession films, and they do nothing for me. And it's weird because he attributes it to being an ex-Catholic, And I think they don't work for me because I'm an ex-Catholic. You know what I mean? And so I was asking, what is anything too much? Is there anything you can't watch? Like, what do you think that is? Or what do you think that says about you? And, it's always really interesting to see how people's like different visceras come to the fore. I have a big problem with any kind of like paralysis narrative or being buried alive is like the worst thing I can imagine. So those kind of films always, like The Descent freaks me out. Like that's a very good movie to me.
There's like once the monsters show up, I'm relieved. Woo, but it's them climbing down, and there's this one long shot of
the travels, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'm just like, please cut, because I start getting claustrophobic right there. This big, expansive movie theater, and I'm getting claustrophobic.
I mean, for me, it's The Vanishing now. So
Naked Lunch, yeah.
The thing for me is that I'm not necessarily claustrophobic, but it is the idea of my body being immobilized that I don't like. And there's a scene where her arm gets pinned or her leg gets pinned, I think, under an avalanche, that I can't deal with that. That freaks me out. Like, even though it's not horror, the movie Gravity freaks me out when she's like endlessly spinning.
Right.
In like the emptiness of space. That is terrifying to me. Right?
Yeah.
It's like not being able to kill yourself. It's just like, it's the existential dread that kind of scene gives me, I can't even describe.
Yeah, that I think I watched that by myself once when I first saw it, and I thought that was a fantastic film. And then I went and read Neil deGrasse Tyson's notes on the actual science behind it, and I was just like, God damn it.
Does that ruin things for you? I mean, I think I know that movies are not real science.
No, very much so. But when you've got the filmmaker saying that everything's very legitimate and everything, it's like, okay, you didn't have to make that statement. I would have bought into the fantasy.
True.
But now that you made that statement and you actually have a scientist who's like, nah, this X and Y and Z don't work, so therefore, this can't happen. So I'm like, God damn it. so sometimes I can get taken up. But to the effect of like an exorcism film.
Yeah.
One, like, growing up with The Exorcist, like when I was a kid, I pissed my my grandmother's carpet when I saw it on television. Like she shouldn't have had that TV on. But growing up with it, it's just a good movie, and I really don't think that much of it. As far as like the horror aspect, I just think it's a good story. But and it's a PG-13 movie of all things. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Every time I watch it, I have nightmares and I can't sleep that night.
Interesting. It's funny you mentioned that film because that was the film that actually got me started on my book about evil children. And in my book, I read evil children and horror films as metaphors for queer youth, right? And The Exorcist is a deeply conservative film, right? It's a film of that kind of punishing a working mother, where her child regresses to an infant and takes over her life. And it's all about the terrible things that happen when patriarchy is gone, right? In this house run by women, look at this girl goes out of control. And it's up to the church literally kind of rides in to save the day. He's wearing a fedora, like a cowboy hat, and he rescues her from kind of going demonic. It's kind of like a version of The Searchers is how The Exorcist ends, right? Okay. Where the cowboy, one young, one old, goes and saves the girl from going native, But and this is, again, getting back to like how different people see different things when they watch the same movie. When I watch the movie and she vomits on the priest, I know the film is, I know I'm supposed to be disgusted, but I think it's hilarious. Right?
It is funny.
It's hilarious. And so like part of my investigation is like, well, why am I reading this film oppositionally? Why am I not going where it's pretty obvious the film wants me to go? What is something about my identity? And I said, well, it's interesting that like if you look at the evil children in film, you have certain types. You have the child who harbors a secret that they can't tell. The child who has to go out and find others like them, like Jonah the Corn, something like that. A child that's not mine, and I have to reject it and disown it, right? Like The Omen, other films like that. Or like The Exorcist, the child that is mine, but in adolescence, they become an unrecognizable monster, right? They're all just ways about talking about the queer child, right? And because we don't have a vocabulary for talking about queer children, because I think in the conservative imagination, they don't really exist, that you can't be a queer child. They come out in these other ways. And I think horror is one of those ways in which we see the queer child articulated as the child gone wrong, or the child that I have to disown, right?
Yeah.
And the child in the horror genre is always revolting, and that's where the title comes from, the revolting child, because they're disgusting, but they're also bodies in revolt against the state, against the family, right?
Yeah.
And so The Exorcist is really, for me, just a movie about conversion therapy, right? It's about a girl who becomes a demon in adolescence, and just like the videos that you would see from some sort of rabid Baptist church exorcising, praying the gay away, they're praying the demon out of Regan, right?
Yeah.
Making her into a proper girl again.
Do you think that's going to be true with the majority of exorcism films?
I mean, there's a reason why a lot of them focus on girls on the cusp of puberty, right? Because it's like when desire becomes activated. I think, again, exorcisms, like zombies, like vampires, they're empty signifiers. They can become whatever we want them to be. I think The Exorcist in particular is about a girl gone wrong and bringing her back into the fold. But we're still occupied with the sort of, by and large, this sort of young female body as susceptible to invasion, right? Yeah, I mean, but the possession films are really kind of fascinating one. A lot of times the demon is characterized in a really xenophobic way. In The Exorcist, it comes from Africa, right? And the white girl's body, right? It's about purifying her body of this African demon.
Right. Well, yeah, it's already, you're already setting up the the threat of the outsider.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is a really not so good thing to do. Yeah. Now I kind of want to see that horror movie where there is no exorcism, the demon's allowed to live in the kid, and because of it, you get the best albums.
What is that?
Huh?
The movie yet to be made. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now I'm like, oh, that'd be cool. That essentially would probably become any good teen comedy, I suppose, is that film.
Hey, my chapter on The Exorcist is called "Demons Are a Girl's Best Friend." So there's
What's that?
The chapter on The Exorcist is called that I wrote is called "Demons Are a Girl's Best Friend."
Nice. See, I think that's the name of the movie.
It should be.
Just take that that chapter and adapt it. Just change the names and the locations and stuff. There you go. You got a film.
We have a ready-made musical number for it. So
yeah, Heather says she'd watch it.
Perfect.
Oh, Brandon's talking about the medical scenes.
All right, yeah, absolutely.
From The Exorcist.
Those are the most horrifying scenes to me. Where she's in that enormous machine and she gets the needle in her throat.
Right. Oh my God. Yeah. Talk about body horror.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Shoot. I had something. It's gone. I think it's time for more coffee.
Absolutely.
But man. God, one of the things too that as far as contemporary horror films go, it like Hereditary is another one that gave me nightmares. I watched it the first time. I thought it was just absolutely ludicrous. I sat there and laughed and was like, well, this doesn't work. It's like, where are the police and all this? There is a death, There's a lot of scenarios and that just don't quite add up.
Mm.
And then, that night, as far as the effect on me, I couldn't sleep. I was sitting there laughing through the whole movie, thought it was the most stupidest, ridiculous thing. And so obviously I wasn't really reading into what was actually there at the first time. And then I couldn't sleep. I'm like looking up at the corner, just like, he's like, why is that shadow moving? And what's going on over there? And then I realized, okay, this has had some kind of effect on me. There's something there. I need to rewatch it. And I did. And it's like, so these rules don't actually apply, but you can, read into a lot of these other things, like, just the fact that the family itself is completely not capable of dealing with emotions and communicating that, to each other, which pretty much sets up their entire self-destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Not even to comment on the supernatural aspects to it.
Right. It's a film that maybe I should give another try. I think I'm in the camp of people who didn't. I love Midsummer, but I wasn't a huge fan of Hereditary. For me, Hereditary felt too close to like a Roman Polanski film.
Right. Totally understand that. Yeah.
Like it was, somebody trying to reproduce him in a way. It just had too many elements of Rosemary's Baby and Repulsion and The Tenant for me to kind of think of it as an original, innovative work.
Okay.
But I loved Midsummer. There's something going on right now with like the Drug Trip movie, right? Where the horror is losing control of your faculties and being able to recognize like what is reality.
Right.
I saw it in Midsummer. I think I saw Climax. There's a film that's just a sort of terrifying loss of perception of what's real. Lighthouse. It happens in this film Beach House that I was talking earlier. Something about that. I think it might be something contemporary.
Yeah. Is it, like even with Lighthouse, it seems like the descent into madness, being stuck in one location with somebody else that you don't really get along with to begin with.
Right.
And
don't you think too that we're just in an era where at least the government is trying to present multiple truths and to question the nature of and to and to use alternatives and conspiracy theories and conjecture in order to sort of muddy the waters of what is truth.
Right. Just
I feel like we're in an era where it's harder and harder to designate what is true.
Right. It's, too many people leave it up to, it's like, well, it's all about perspective. It's like, nah, there's also the fact that there's fact, and you really can't dispute it, but yet here we are disputing.
When you're trying to talk to someone and say, no, this is like COVID is real, right? It's on CNN, where they're like, oh, CNN, mainstream media. To have those kinds of conversations where they're even questioning sort of the fact of a pandemic is a very sort of modern thing that we're experiencing, right? And I think that there's something that horror films are exploring right now about the inscrutability of like what is true, right? And the danger that comes with that. Right.
Yeah. I think that's very true. I think something like Lighthouse offers that up pretty well. I think Midsommar is a fantastic breakup film.
It's definitely has that. I mean, it's
and then it's kind of set against that backdrop of, well, this is a documentary about a culture and what they go through, and so I'm like watching it. I'm watching that stuff through that context or that lens, and I'm just so even the really horrifying stuff's like, yeah, that stuff happens. That's what they believe. Okay. And then the real horrifying stuff is like, well, you're the outsiders, and I feel bad saying that, but you're also like, you're the epitome of American arrogance coming into another area that you don't know and don't understand.
Right.
And, instead of like really learning and trying to understand, you're being very disruptive to their culture.
Mm.
This is their way of life. This is how they are. You just got to accept it. So I always find that interesting. It's like, oh yeah, Americans, arrogance.
Absolutely.
I do think. Oh, sorry. I just saw somebody post Spider-Man: Far From Home touches on that as well. Not sure what they're referring to.
When we were talking about the sort of inability to discern the truth, absolutely. I read Mysterio as kind of Trump, right? Who is sort of muddying the waters with multiple, illusions. It feels very contemporary. It feels like a very kind of contemporary mode.
Yeah. I think Brandon's talking about Midsummer. Such a remarkable film, depiction of psychedelics and alter perception juxtaposed with gaslighting, alters the future of the main character, circles back to a harsh reality. Or maybe he's referring to Lighthouse.
Couldn't be the one.
I think there might be some themes that kind of cross-pollinate what we're talking about.
For sure.
But yeah, it's.
Well, I mean, I think too when you're talking about Hereditary, I think that something that Master is exploring is this sort of compartmentalization of emotion and how we numb ourselves from dealing with our reality. Right. It feels kind of like a similar theme in both.
Right. Yeah. Brandon says, Midsommar, but Lighthouse fits too. Yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier too about how hilarious Exorcist is. One of the things I really get a kick out of, and I'm only appreciating it probably because I'm in my 40s and I'm lame. Is that I'll watch something and it just I don't really connect to it, or I just it's just like it's okay, it's not great, but I'll watch it with somebody else. It takes on a whole new meaning because I'm with this person.
Right.
So one of the most recent ones is on Disney Plus, The Mandalorian. And I'm just okay, this to me it just feels like a syndicated sci-fi show, where it's just really clean, and there's no blood and guts and stuff, but they're still trying to depict that lone wolf samurai, or that lone Eastwood type character, that rough says nothing, speaks little, carries a big stick type thing.
Sure.
And I was like, well, the special effects are great, and I only really care about when Baby Yoda shows up. So otherwise, there's not a lot of character. But when I watched it with my girlfriend, she was invested in it, and so thereby it's like, I'm a little bit more invested. So I'm watching it a little bit more through her eyes, and you kind of appreciate it a little bit more. So I think it's interesting, the company we keep.
Sure.
Because a horror movie might be a magnificent drama in one sensibility, but with a different audience, it's a remarkable comedy.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, there are entire genres that don't speak to me. Like the gangster genre tends to do nothing for me, or the Western, or the war film. For me, it's just a bunch of guys boo-hooing about how hard it is to be American.
Masculinity, right?
Right. So I'm I'm always get over yourself, right? And it's it's especially the mobster genre. It's about men who enjoy the kind of anarchy and then cry about it when they have to pay the price.
Right.
And so it's very hard for me to connect with those characters and to feel sorry for any of them because they're the ones that cause the problem. And I never really attach to them because they're just not points of identification for me.
Right. No, I totally get that. There's a lot of Westerns like that for me. Pretty much anything with John Wayne. And it's just I don't see myself as him. He's usually plays himself in real life, and I associate that as an arrogance. I also kind of get that same sensation when I watch a lot of Tom Cruise movies. Maybe not so much the stuff in the 80s, but certainly a lot of the things now. Like, as much as I do enjoy the Mission Impossible movies, I don't enjoy them because of him.
Right.
I do like the outtakes where he breaks an arm or something. That's hilarious.
It's funny, like, speaking about movies that we go back and watch, if we go back and watch like Top Gun now, it's a dick. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't want to follow any rules. He thinks he knows better than all the teachers. Right. And it's this sort of period in the 80s where we're privileging the kind of gung-ho, rugged individual hero who doesn't listen to authority. And there's a great moment. I don't like.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I have, I think if I go back and watch that, it's just because of nostalgic purposes. And then, I sit there and I watch the editing and stuff and how everything kind of cuts together and the pacing of it.
Yeah.
And how it tells the story. So I guess I watch it for the mechanics and the craft. But at the same time, like they put out that trailer for Top Gun 2.
Is it Top Gun 2?
Yeah, and I am sad because all the things that you pointed out, it's like, oh, he knows better and stuff. Yeah, here's this guy. He's about 60 now, and he's still being in the trailer. There's still that conveyance, like he's still a rebel.
Right.
He hasn't learned his lessons. He hasn't conformed, and it's just like, oh, what a sad person that he doesn't have these human connections at his age. And his character, they allude to in the trailer, won't know until you actually see the movie, but it just, he hasn't developed as a character. He's not a character.
Well, I think just we're a nation of really conflicting ideologies around this. On the one hand, we're a democratic nation, and we believe that there is a kind of social contract, and that we're a nation that was formed through rebellion against a bad father, right? That's the nation's origin story. And so movies like Top Gun, like, imagine a world in which we can all be rebels, which makes no sense, right? How can you have a national body where everyone's like, fuck you, I'm going to do what I want to do? Or maybe that's the Republican fantasy. I don't know.
I think so. It's a film of the 80s, you know.
Absolutely.
It definitely. I think that type of film definitely speaks to that, and you get a lot of those. I think even like the Friday the 13th, kind of can be associated with that type of thing too. Just Jason Voorhees, like I always think of him as this big giant throbbing dick with a machete, So I think the best
the first one when it was Mrs. Voorhees.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't until the third one until he got his iconic hockey mask.
Right.
So I think that's about I think it's the kind of the Kane Hodder era of those films where he really kind of became his own iconic creature, and I keep thinking of him as like some kind of that's some kind of establishment, just cutting everything down, any type of sexual promiscuity. But then again, that was tropes set up in Halloween.
Sure.
I think it's just hyper intensified in the Friday the 13th movies, and then all the subsequent films, that were influenced with that, just kind of carried on with that. Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
I think, man, we've been talking for quite a while. I love it.
Off the board too.
Yeah. Hey, so for anybody out there who wants to follow you and follow up on your books and your next documentary appearances, where can they follow you at?
So I'm on Twitter at Andrew Scahill, and I have a website and I try and keep up to date with things that I'm publishing and other appearances, that kind of thing. And that is ADSCAHILL.com. AD Scahill.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for coming on and talking talking film with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for being so generous with your time.
Of course, my pleasure.
Oh, great. And Heather says thank you as well.
Thank you, Heather. Very kind of you.
Cool. Well, thanks for everybody that was able to tune in. I'm Dan Crosier, the host of COFOH Live Undead with my guest Andrew Scahill. It's been an absolute pleasure, and to everybody out there, also I want to thanks for tuning in, and hope everybody has a good night. And I do have to say thanks to my sponsors, Sumner Twins Talent, to my COFOH partners, and then to my producers, Stefan Santa Cruz and Amanda Armstrong. Thanks for everybody, for making this, happen. Everybody, have a good night. Be good. Be kind to each other. Take care.